My wife cheated with our fitness influencer neighbor. I confronted her, but she accused me of domestic violence first. I lost my kids, my job, and almost everything. But the FBI discovered she was a serial scammer with 5 victims. Now she's 15 years in prison, and I'm a millionaire. They never expected this. I'm 34 years old. I work in tech. Well, I worked until all this happened, and I need to tell this story because I still can't believe it's real. What happened about 2 years ago basically destroyed my life. I mean, destroyed it completely, and then rebuilt it in a way I never imagined. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I met Kristen in 2014 at a Starbucks, because that's where all of this started. It was one of those typical days where you're running late for work and you order your coffee in a rush, and I, being the disaster that I am, bumped into someone and spilled coffee all over her laptop. The person was Kristen, a cute girl who was sitting there working on something, and I was mortified. Like, I wanted the earth to swallow me. She laughed, told me don't worry, these things happen, and we ended up talking for like an hour. She asked me to pay for the laptop repair by taking her to dinner, and that's how it all started. She was charming, worked as a dental hygienist, seemed genuine and sweet, and I thought, wow, maybe spilling coffee on people is my pickup strategy now. We got married in 2015, bought a small house in the suburbs of the Northeast. You know, one of those 2-story little houses with a tiny yard that's perfect for starting out. I had just finished my degree in computer science and was working at a mid-sized company. Nothing spectacular, but it paid the bills. Kristen continued at her job as a dental hygienist, and everything seemed perfect. I mean, we had our problems like any couple, but nothing serious. In 2016, Zoe was born, and let me tell you, it was the happiest moment of my life up to that point. Then, in 2019, Logan came along, and I thought, this is it. This is my perfect family, you know? I had everything I'd always wanted. In 2020, I joined a small cybersecurity startup, one of those companies nobody knows about but that work on important stuff. The salary wasn't great, but they gave me stock options, like 200,000 shares that at the time were worth practically nothing. Kristen complained that I worked too many hours, and yeah, it was true. I was spending like 60 to 70 hours a week in front of the computer, but I thought I was building our future. You know what I mean? I'd tell her, just hang in there a little longer. If this takes off, we're gonna be fine. She'd say yes with her mouth, but I could see she was frustrated. In 2021, the new neighbors arrived, Connor and Lindsay. Connor was one of those guys who work out all day and post photos on Instagram pretending to be a fitness influencer, but the truth is he only had like 3,000 followers. He'd set up a gym in his garage with decent equipment, Olympic bars and stuff like that, and started offering workouts to people in the neighborhood. Lindsay was a lawyer, pretty quiet, always seemed stressed. I'd talk to them occasionally, you know, the typical neighbor conversations about weather and traffic. Nothing deep. Kristen started going to Connor's gym in the summer of 2021, let's say August or September. At first I thought, great. She wants to get in shape. That's fine, we all need to exercise. She'd go like 3 or 4 times a week, always in the afternoons when I was working. Sometimes she'd come home sweaty and happy, saying Connor's routines were incredible, that she was seeing results. I was so buried in my work that I didn't pay attention to the signs, and looking back, I should have seen it coming because all the signs were there. She started dressing differently, more dressed up to go work out, like with those expensive Lululemon athletic sets. Her phone suddenly had a new password. She'd laugh a lot looking at text messages. When I'd ask what was so funny, she'd say, "Oh, nothing, stuff from a mom's group from school." Once I tried to kiss her when she got back from the gym, and she pushed me away saying she was too sweaty, that she was going to shower first. These little things that don't seem like a big deal individually, but that together paint a very clear picture, you know? The day I discovered everything was in March 2022. I had left work early because I had to pick up Logan from daycare. Kristen was supposedly at Connor's gym. I passed by the house, dropped Logan off with my mom who lived nearby, and something made me turn around and drive by Connor's house. I don't know what it was exactly. Maybe intuition. Maybe I just wanted to confirm I was being paranoid for no reason. His garage was closed, but there was a side window, and when I looked inside, I saw them. They were on the couch, Connor had in there, kissing, and she was sitting on top of him, and I just stood there frozen, watching the scene like it was someone else's movie. I took out my phone and recorded like 30 seconds of video. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the phone steady, and then I left. I didn't knock on the door, I didn't make a scene. I just got in the car and drove aimlessly for like 2 hours. I called a friend. I told him what I'd seen. He told me I needed to confront her with evidence, that I needed to talk to a lawyer before doing anything. And that night when I got home, I acted normal. I mean, as normal as I could, because I needed to think through my next move carefully. What I didn't know, and this is what still kills me when I think about it, is that Kristen and Connor already had a plan. They weren't just having an affair, they had planned out an entire strategy to get me out of the equation and keep everything. And the next day, before I could even confront her or talk to a lawyer, I got a visit from the police at my office. It was like 10 inches the morning. I was in an important meeting with the development team, and 2 cops came in and told me, "Kenneth, we need you to come with us." All my coworkers just stared at me, and I was confused. Like, what's happening? They handcuffed me right there, in front of everyone, and told me I was being arrested for domestic violence. Kristen had filed charges, that morning saying I had hit her the night before, that I had threatened to kill her, that she feared for her life and the kids' lives. She had photos of bruises on her arm, a medical report, everything perfectly documented. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I literally thought it was a nightmare I was going to wake up from. I told them, "This is a lie. She's having an affair. I have evidence." But they told me, "Sir, you can talk to your lawyer about that." I spent 48 hours in jail, and let me tell you, those were the longest 48 hours of my life. I was in a cell with other guys, some for fights, others for Dewey, and me there thinking about how my life had fallen apart in a matter of hours. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I just thought about my kids and how Kristen had planned this so perfectly. When I finally got out on bail, I had a restraining order that prohibited me from going near my own house, my wife, my kids. They also put an ankle monitor on me, one of those electronic shackles, because supposedly I was a danger to society. Kristen got emergency custody of Zoe and Logan immediately. I could only see them once a week for 2 hours, and it had to be at a supervised visitation center with a social worker there watching every move I made. Zoe, who was like 6 years old at that point, would ask me why she couldn't come home with Daddy, and I didn't know what to tell her because I couldn't badmouth her mom in front of the supervisor. Logan was very small, barely 3 years old, and every time the visit ended, he'd cry because he wanted to stay with me. It was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. My company fired me a week later. They said they couldn't have someone with pending criminal charges working in cybersecurity, that it was a risk to their reputation. I lost my salary, I lost my benefits, and worst of all, I thought I'd lost my stock options too. I moved to a tiny studio apartment that smelled like mildew, had a mattress on the floor, and my few belongings in boxes. I started driving for Uber just to pay rent and food, and believe me, going from software engineer to Uber driver is a huge blow to the ego, but I had no choice. My lawyer, Mitchell, was good, but things looked really bad. The video I'd recorded of Kristen and Connor was evidence of infidelity, but didn't prove the violence accusations were false. The photos of Kristen's bruises looked real. The medical report was legitimate, and basically it was my word against hers. Mitchell told me we'd probably have to reach a settlement, maybe take anger management classes, accept some kind of reduced guilt to avoid going to prison. I told him, but I didn't do anything, and he responded, "I know, but the system doesn't always work based on truth. It works based on evidence." Several months went by like that, from July to December 2022, me surviving day to day, seeing my kids 2 hours a week, feeling completely defeated. Kristen had filed for divorce, obviously, asking for full custody, the house, half of everything, though there wasn't much to divide because I had practically nothing already. My life was in complete ruins. I had lost everything, and the only thing keeping me sane was thinking that someday my kids would know the truth. Then something happened that changed absolutely everything. In December 2022, a massive security vulnerability called Log4j came to light. I don't know if you remember, but it was in the news everywhere, because it affected millions of systems. Turns out the software my startup had developed was one of the few that could detect and mitigate this vulnerability automatically. Overnight, our unknown little company became extremely valuable, like the big tech companies were fighting each other to buy us. In February 2023, Amazon Web Services, AWS, bought the startup for $2.1 billion. Yeah, you read that right, billion with a B. My 200,000 shares that were worth nothing when I got fired suddenly were worth $49.4 million. After taxes, I kept like $28 million. I was living in a horrible apartment, driving Uber, and suddenly I was a multimillionaire. Life is weird, isn't it? Like, in 1 month, I went from not being able to pay rent to having more money than I could spend in my entire life. The first thing I did was call Mitchell and tell him, "We have to fight this with everything. Hire whoever you need, spend whatever's necessary, because now I have the resources to do it." He hired private investigators, digital forensic experts, everything that could help. And then, like 2 weeks after the acquisition news came out in the tech media, Kristen contacted me for the first time in almost a year. She sent me a text message, which technically violated the restraining order, but I guess she thought it didn't matter. It said, "Kenneth, I know things between us ended badly, but I've been thinking a lot and I think I made a mistake. The kids miss you. I miss you. Maybe we should try again. We should talk about our future." I laughed when I read that, like a bitter and sad laugh, because it was so obvious what she was doing. She'd seen the news about the money and now wanted her share. I responded something short, like, "Any communication has to be through lawyers," and she got angry. She started sending me aggressive messages, saying I owed her half that money because we were married when I received the shares, that technically it was marital property. Mitchell told me to block her number, not to respond to anything else, and I did. But Kristen didn't stop there, obviously. In March 2023, she filed a motion in court asking for half the acquisition money plus modified custody. Her argument was that I was still dangerous, that the ankle monitor and restrictions should continue, but that she deserved financial compensation for everything she had suffered. She also asked for alimony of like $50,000 a month. It was ridiculous, completely ridiculous. But her lawyer filed all the appropriate paperwork and we had to respond. The hearing was scheduled for May. During those 2 months, Mitchell and his team worked tirelessly. The private investigators discovered something incredible, something we hadn't even been specifically looking for. Turns out Connor had security cameras in his garage, those kind that record all the time and save the video to the cloud. The investigators were able to access that system, don't ask me exactly how, and found videos of Kristen and Connor planning the entire strategy. In one of the videos, recorded like a week before I was arrested, they're sitting on that same couch where I saw them kissing, and Kristen is saying, "We need to move fast before he does something. If he files for divorce first, we're going to lose the advantage." Connor responds, "So we do what we said. You make the bruises, go to the hospital, file charges before he can react." Kristen says, "Are you sure it's going to work?" And Connor says, "Trust me. I've done it before. It works. Perfectly." When Mitchell showed me that video, I almost fainted. Not only had they planned to falsely accuse me, but Connor had admitted he'd done it before. The investigators started investigating Connor's past and discovered that he and Kristen, yeah, my wife Kristen, had executed this same scheme in 2 other cities before. Connor would move to a suburban neighborhood, befriend families where the husband worked in tech with potential to make money, start an affair with the wife, and then execute this fraud of false domestic violence accusations. They found 3 other victims, 3 men who had gone through exactly the same thing as me. One had lost custody of his kids permanently. Another had accepted a guilty plea to avoid prison and now had a criminal record. The third had declared bankruptcy paying legal fees. Kristen wasn't just an unfaithful wife, she was a professional scammer, and Connor was her accomplice. They'd been doing this for years, moving from city to city, from victim to victim. The May hearing was a moment I'll never forget. Kristen arrived dressed conservatively, like with a modest dress and her hair pulled back, playing the role of abused wife perfectly. Her lawyer started his presentation, talking about the trauma she had suffered, about how I was a violent and dangerous man, about how she deserved compensation for everything. I was sitting there listening to these lies, clenching my fists under the table, but Mitchell had told me to stay calm no matter what. When it was Mitchell's turn, he stood up with a tablet in his hand and asked the judge if he could present video evidence. The judge said yes, and Mitchell played the video of Connor and Kristen planning the fraud. Kristen's face. Oh God, her face when she realized what was happening. She turned white, completely white, and started shaking her head. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him and said, "I want to see this complete." After that video, Mitchell presented evidence of the other 3 cases, sworn statements from the other victims, records showing how Connor and Kristen had moved from city to city together. He showed that Lindsay, Connor's wife, had divorced him in 2022 after discovering the scheme, and that she was now one of the witnesses willing to testify. Lindsay turned out to be a lawyer specializing in family law, and when she discovered what her husband was doing, she decided to help expose the entire fraud. The judge was visibly angry. He asked Kristen directly, "Did you file false domestic violence charges against your husband?" She didn't respond, just started crying, but they weren't convincing tears, they were tears of panic. Her lawyer asked for a recess to consult with his client, and the judge said, "No, we're going to finish this now." He dismissed all criminal charges against me immediately, removed the restraining order, ordered an emergency custody evaluation, and told Kristen she was going to have to pay all my legal fees, which up to that point added up to like $300,000. But the judge didn't stop there. He said he was referring the case to the district attorney to investigate charges of fraud, perjury, and filing false police reports. He also ordered that Kristen couldn't leave the state while the investigation was ongoing. When we left court that day, Mitchell hugged me and said, "We won, Kenneth, you won." But I didn't feel like I'd won yet, because my kids had been away from me for over a year, and I didn't know what damage that had done. The custody evaluation was conducted by a psychologist named Dr. SAPM. Helen, specialized in parental alienation. She spent several weeks doing individual interviews with Zoe and Logan, observing them with Kristen, observing them with me. Zoe, who was already 7 years old, told the doctor that Mommy had told her Daddy was bad, that Daddy had hurt Mommy, but that she didn't understand why Daddy was so nice when she saw him. Logan was still very small, but the doctor noticed he was fearful around Kristen, that he got anxious when Kristen raised her voice. Dr. Helen's report was devastating for Kristen. She concluded that Kristen had actively participated in parental alienation, that she had manipulated the children against me, that she had used the children as tools in her fraud scheme. She recommended that I receive primary physical custody immediately, that Kristen have only supervised visits, and that the children begin specialized therapy to reverse the damage from the alienation. The judge accepted all the recommendations, and in June 2023, my kids came back to live with me. While all this was happening, the FBI had gotten involved because the fraud scheme had crossed state lines, which made it a federal crime. In July, they arrested Kristen and Connor. They found evidence that they had scammed not just 3, but 2 other men who hadn't come forward before. In total, 5 victims in 4 different states over 6 years. Federal fraud. Charges are serious, like, very serious. And the prosecutor was seeking significant prison time. Connor decided to cooperate quickly, basically confessed everything, and testified against Kristen in exchange for a reduced sentence. He admitted that he had developed this scheme after realizing that many tech workers had stock options that could be worth millions, and that the easiest way to access that money was through their wives. Kristen was his perfect partner because she was charismatic, convincing, and completely unscrupulous. According to Connor, she was really the brains behind the operation. He just provided the gym hook and the alibi. Kristen went to trial in October 2023. Mitchell told me I didn't have to attend, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to look her in the eyes when I heard the verdict. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and every day was more evidence, more testimony, more proof of what she had done not just to me but to other men. The other 4 men testified, told their stories, and it was heartbreaking to hear how similar everything was. She used the same tactics, the same words, the same moves in each case. The jury found her guilty on all charges in less than 3 hours of deliberation. Sentencing came in November. The judge gave her 15 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 12 years if she has good behavior. Connor received 10 years with possibility of parole after 7 for having cooperated. When the judge read the sentence, Kristen finally showed some real emotion, started sobbing and screaming that she was sorry, that please don't send her to prison, that her kids needed her. But it was too late. The damage was done. Now, almost 2 years after all this started, I'm rebuilding my life with Zoe and Logan. We moved to a new house, far from the neighborhood where we lived before because there were too many bad memories there. It's a nice house, not ostentatious but comfortable, with a big yard where the kids can play. I hired Dr. Helen to continue working with them in therapy, helping them process everything that happened, helping them understand that none of this was their fault. Zoe is better now. She's 8 years old and is starting to understand that what her mom told her about me wasn't true. She still has nightmares sometimes, still asks why her mom did those things, and I try to answer honestly, but in an age-appropriate way. I tell her that sometimes adults make very bad decisions, that her mom is where she needs to be, that what's important now is that we're together and safe. Logan is more resilient because he was so small when it all happened. He's just happy to have Daddy all the time. With part of the money from the acquisition, I created a foundation to help other men who have been falsely accused of domestic violence. I work with lawyers, private investigators, psychologists, providing free legal resources to men who can't afford them. In the last year, we've helped like 15 people clear their names, regain custody of their children, rebuild their lives. It's called the Second Chance Foundation, and it's my way of turning something horrible into something good, you know? Lindsay, Connor's ex-wife, became an important ally. She specialized in parental alienation cases after seeing what her ex-husband did and now works with the foundation pro bono. She told me she always suspected something was wrong with Connor, but never imagined the magnitude of the fraud. She feels guilty for not speaking up sooner, but I tell her she had no way of knowing, that what's important is that in the end, she did the right thing. Last week, Zoe asked me if we're ever going to see Mommy again. I told her the truth, that yes, probably when she's older, and if she wants to, but that it'll be her decision. She thought for a moment and then said, "I think I'm angry with her." "Daddy," I responded, "it's okay to be angry. Your feelings are valid. We can talk about that with Dr. Helen." She nodded, and then changed the subject to her science project from school, and I was grateful that kids can move so quickly from heavy topics to normal kid stuff. I'm not going to lie and say everything's perfect now, because it's not. I still have days where I'm angry, where I think about all the time I lost with my kids, about how I almost lost everything because of the actions of someone who supposedly loved me. I go to therapy too, working on forgiving not for her but for myself, because carrying that hatred doesn't do me any good. It's a process. Some days are easier than others. But when I see my kids laughing in the yard, when Logan comes running and hugs me just because, when Zoe tells me I love you, Daddy, before bed, I know that in the end, the truth won. Justice was done. It doesn't always happen like that. I know. Many men in my situation never recover their lives, never clear their names. I was lucky to have evidence, to have resources, eventually, to have a legal system that worked as it should. And now, I use that luck to help others who didn't have it. Kristen is in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I haven't spoken to her since the trial and don't plan to. The kids can write her letters if they want. Dr. Helen says it's okay to keep that door open, but so far, neither has wanted to. Maybe someday, when they're adults, they'll seek out that connection, but for now they're fine without her. And I'm fine being enough for them, being the present, stable, honest father I always wanted to be. Sometimes people ask me if I regret spilling that coffee at Starbucks in 2014, if I wish I'd never met Kristen. The truth is, I can't regret something that gave me Zoe and Logan. They're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and even though the road was horrible, brutal, almost destroyed me, in the end it led me to where I needed to be. I'm a better father now than I would have been without this experience. More patient, more present, more grateful for every moment. Yesterday, Logan told me that, when he grows up, he wants to be like me. I asked him why, and he said, "Because you always fight for what's right, Daddy." He was 4 years old saying this, and I almost cried right there. That's what matters now. That my kids see me as someone who didn't give up, who fought for them, who kept going even when everything seemed lost. And that's enough for me. It's more than enough.